A lot of fighters would not like to hear what I'm about to say. A lot of fans might not like to hear what I'm about to say, but the reality is, it has to be said. Because it is an often ignored fact at the base of every single success. And that is the real cost of being world champion in MMA. It rarely goes through our mind what the cost will be for these fighters. And it often ignores what the cost is for these fighters. Do fighters constantly have this fear of CTE? At the turn of the 20th century, boxing, who had been struggling to gain any traction, was starting to turn the tide of popularity and success commercially. Now with higher crowd attendances and higher purses, prize fighters were swapping rings stuffed inside dilapidated illegal casinos for the crowds of the glitz and sold-out arenas. John L. Sullivan, with a win over Dominic McCarthy in 1885, had set in motion a 100-year-long dominant reign of heavyweight boxing. From Jack Johnson to Jack Dempsey to Muhammad Ali, they set the stage for a storied legacy that would ultimately define society for years to come. And it would almost become a metaphor on how to live your life in America. All you need to do is go to the 1970s and watch Rocky, and watch Sylvester Stallone as Rocky gets knocked out and puts everything he has into getting up and continuing to fight, making boxing's base be hope. But that didn't stop award-winning author Tris Dixon in his 2021 book called Damage, describing boxing as Russian roulette with gloves. All the glamour, wealth, and fame can ultimately not shield the cumulative damage that is made punch after knockout. It's a metaphorical chamber where possibly a bullet would be deposited and destroy your life. And the more you take, the likelier you are to come face to face with a loaded chamber. Now, a lot of us think of CTE as a newly discovered disease. However, that couldn't be further from the truth. In the 1800s, the example of Ad Wolgast, the lightweight who made headlines during the period between 1906 and 1916, the days when the world's greatest lightweights were competing. During his final years, he truly believed he would be making a return to the ring and fighting the world champion once again and becoming world champion himself. One of his doctors is on record as saying, "We can't do anything for him. He has lost his mind. He has lost grips on all elements of time, too much battering along the head, alone, broken. His mind grounds to dust." Wolgast would die at 67. Described as hopelessly insane, battling Nelson and Ad Wolgast, two competitors who had a 60-round fight originally, would both die without any knowledge of the fight even happening. At this time, this was a standard tale of boxing. I just chose a specific one to illustrate what it looked like. And this led scientists wondering what was causing these fighters to be punch drunk. In 1928, pathologist Dr. Harrison Stanford Marland would publish his paper entitled Punch Drunk. Focused on observations that doctors would make at time on boxers, he noted that those who were taking a beating to make a living would be suffering with tremors, slowed movement, confusion, speech problems. Being punch drunk was often a slur that would be forwarded to the veterans of the sport, which couldn't speak properly and would act like they were drunk. The reality was much worse. However, at this time, the political landscape of the country had more pressing matters to address. And with all the serious subjects coming up, people just couldn't care about why two people that were boxing each other were now slurring their words all of a sudden after punching each other on the head. The reality is, all of this is entertainment. And if you have things to take care of, entertainment comes last. So the problems would go unaddressed. Prohibition and two world wars were just more important, as the Great Depression took precedent. A slight glimmer of hope did exist, as even though a lot of political tribulations were happening, there was a small group of scientists doing research and analysis on dead fighters' brains. The warning signs were there, but there just wasn't anybody to hear them. Boxers just kept getting into the ring and exposing themselves to damage that no human brain should go through. In 1949, British neurologist MacDonald Critchley published a study titled Chronic Traumatic Encephalopathy. It was an attempt of moving away with somewhat the inappropriate name, punch drunk, and giving it somewhat more of a legitimate name, something more professional sounding, in an attempt to making this syndrome more professional and bringing more attention to it. So CTE was born. What exactly is it? CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Patrick Gavia said it better than I ever could, so I will pass it on to Patrick Gavia to explain what it is.
After taking head trauma, which is a punch so powerful it's
equal to getting hit by a Ford Escort going fast as it
nerve
can.
cells become damaged. From this, a protein called tau is released. The more punches to the head, the more tau. This can then become tangled up together into clumps. When enough of it is present, it begins to kill brain cells. The brain quite literally shrinks and decays smaller and smaller every second. What comes next? Thoughts, depression, slurred speech, and dementia. Despite this groundbreaking study, there was still no movement.
But once again, this information was available, yet nobody paid attention to it for the next 50 years. It wasn't until Dr. Bennett Omulu, almost half a decade later in the early 2000s, would bring the illness to the forefront once again, and it wasn't because of boxers, it was because of NFL players.
You're about to meet the real-life doctor who discovered that insidious disease found in the brains of athletes who suffered repeated blows to the head.
Bernays worked with former Hall of Famers like player Mike Webster, who after retirement would suffer some of the same injuries that Diggy's boxers were describing. Mood swings, depression, thoughts, and eventually dementia. His brain would be donated to research after his death. And here's where Bernays would lead to groundbreaking research that diagnosed Webster as the first NFL player with CTE. Clearly, a link between the concussions, head hits, and physical mental decline, which was explained by damaged brains and the presence of tau. It was hard for anyone to argue that American football didn't need change, but said change was followed by resistance and denial. And players kept going out there and putting themselves in harm's way and getting continuous hits to the head. But eventually, science prevailed. And with that, a slew of changes has made the sport safer. And science has developed ways to get better protection. The problem with this is the NFL has the NFLPA, an association specifically concerned just for players. This is something that the UFC or MMA in general does not have. So what transpires is no one taking ownership to fighters' damage and protect them. So what transpires is nobody takes the owners and reels them in, and the fighters do know but don't know. It surprised me how many fighters would go out there and be like, oh, we don't know all the factors. We do not know all the factors, but we know the results. And the results are really all that matters. We just want to know why it happens. I'm surprised how many fighters say that the science is not exactly clear on the subject. While there might be some truth to that, what they're talking about is about what exactly is happening. There's no dispute in the results. And the end result is utter and complete brain devastation. Invariably, extreme sports all carry with them the risk of death. There's a constant showing of information of what it would look like to have dementia or CTE. You can just check the movie The Father to see somewhat of a horror film, but there's no monsters, there's no scary characters. The only horrific thing in the movie really is your own brain. If fighters wanted to do the research and know how bad it could be, they could. All the information is out there. However, do they want to do it? Who's to say? Willie Nutamal, who's diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, was compelled into starting self-drawn portraits of himself throughout the process. And what you can find in this art is a slow and haunting decline, as William blurs the line between what's expression of an illness and what is the actual diminishing of his ability in the pain to understand the world around him. As his physical condition grinds his body down, his mind fades with it. It becomes broken, abstract, and unrecognizable. Dementia affects 1 in 14 people of age 65 and up, and 1 in 6 people age 80 and up. So it is undoubtable that you will go through your life constantly meeting people that have dementia. However, it is of course no surprise that there's tons of studies that found that boxers are twice as likely to fall into this fragility as a regular person. And it's really just a matter of time before MMA catches up to that statistic. And it's not looking great. Gary Goodrich, pioneer of the sport, is one of the first documented fighters. His lengthy and vicious career caught up to him.
We've heard rumblings of Spencer Fisher. You look at Matt Hughes, you look at fucking Coleman, you look at what happens to all, go have a conversation with Chuck Liddell. Look at all these old timers, all the guys you grew up loving watching. None of them are doing well mentally. Fucking none of them.
And perhaps the glory, the cheering crowd, perhaps all of this swept them into a life of misery later on in their career. Fighting is the only thing they were ever good at. The most heartbreaking thing is every time they were stepping into that ring, it was to give their families a better life. Now they can't even remember the names.
I just knew it was a do or die, and it kept that in the back of my mind. I have a family to feed, and
sometimes they'll just forget he was supposed to pick me up.
Dad forgot a few things today.
My days suck. Probably given a little bit of depression.
The more that time goes on and the more we get educated on what these guys are putting their bodies and brains through, it's not good.
And as the sport grows, it becomes more obvious that MMA is by far leading the damage in the CTE world. How much damage? We have Napoleon Bonaparte to go over some of the stats.
According to Fight Metric, there have been 6,731 fights, and of these, 2,176 have ended by KO, TKO, or doctor stoppage. But that doesn't paint the whole picture. Occasionally, the octagon will play host to a beatdown more one-sided than Israel Adesanya's anime Dreamgirls, yet somehow doesn't end by KO or TKO. One such example is the fight between Max Holloway and Calvin Kattar. Holloway put on a display of dominance so sublime that I expected Bruce Buffer to declare it a perfect. In total, Max landed 445 significant strikes, 274 of which were to the head. Rewind a few fights before that, and in another war, Max would land 244 strikes to the head of Brian Ortega in a fight so brutal that not only did Ortega lose, and lose badly, but in the aftermath, he shaved off his luxurious locks and gave us the cursed bald Ortega look. Max Holloway is delivering CTE and hair loss like they were prime day deals. Over the course of his UFC career, he's dished out over 3,200 significant strikes. So what does the science say about how many punches an average person should take to the head in a lifetime? Unsurprisingly, it's none. At UFC 200, Mark Hunt fought that all-natural, juice-free, jacked white boy, Brock Lesnar. Hunt was on the receiving end of 137 significant strikes. 137 strikes from a man whose hands were so big, the UFC had to invent a new glove just to fit them. In his next fight, Hunt fought Alistair Overeem, a man so ludicrously muscled, he looks like the real-world inspiration for Biscuit Oliva from Baki the Grappler. Overeem knocked him out. And while Hunt would go on to win his next fight against Derek Lewis, he still ate 34 shots to the head from a man famous for his one-punch KO power. Mark Hunt, not deterred by these losses, would release an article entitled, "If I Die Fighting," in which he said, "My body is fucked, but my mind is still here. I've still got my senses about me, and I know what's right and wrong, which is the main thing. Sometimes I don't sleep well. You can hear me starting to stutter and slur my words. My memory is not as good anymore. I'll forget something I did yesterday, but I can remember the shit I did years and years ago. That's just the price I've paid. The price of being a fighter. But I've fought a lot of drug cheats and copped a lot of punishment from guys who were cheating, and that's not right. I've been fighting since I was a child, fighting to get out of my circumstances. I used to make $300 a week, struggling to put food on the table, but I've become one of the highest paid fighters in the world. I feel that's destiny. This is what I'm supposed to be doing, and if I die fighting, that's fine. I just hope that if it does happen, it will be in an honest and fair competition." The UFC, upon reading this article, would pull Mark Hunt from his next fight, and he was made undergo a series of tests before he could be cleared to fight again. Mark took this as an insult and saw it as the UFC actively trying to take food off his table. Despite slurred speech and memory loss, common symptoms of CTE, he would be allowed to fight again, showing clearly that despite medical advice, fighters can and do lie their way to the ring and compete, such as how Michael Bisping, despite being blinded in one eye after a head kick from a juiced up Vitor Belfort, lied about his vision and cheated on eye exams in order to be cleared to fight. It also shows that the UFC does care when it comes to their fighters, but they can't stop a disgruntled fighter who thinks they know better than to put their body through more wars and is willing to cheat the system in order to do so. Mark Hunt said he wouldn't mind dying in the ring, and I'm sure it's a notion shared among a lot of the fighters of his era, a romanticized Hollywood-style blaze of glory. But the reality is likely to be far more depressing, a drawn-out end, marred by slurred speech, mood swings, memory loss, depression, and ultimately not being able to remember his own career. The truth is, his brain is already broken. Unbelievably, he would fight 3 more times, losing all 3 fights. He would receive 118 more strikes to a body that had already absorbed more damage than any human should.
Mark Hunt is just one of thousands of fighters that have these symptoms. Max Holloway's 3,200 strikes throughout his career are only a drop in the bucket in the millions of hits that somebody takes to the head every single year in the UFC ring. A Canadian research study on traumatic brain injuries in MMA found that in a third of competitions, fighters were being exposed to TBI, which intrinsically leads to the development of CTE. This is literally triple of what boxing does and double what football does. What makes it justifiable for these fighters that reach the top and make millions? And it's extremely fair to assume that for every single fighter that achieved all that, there's one amateur that never achieved anything. Fighters themselves expose themselves to it. Justin Gaethje himself, for example, describes that it makes you better at fighting by sparring and training sessions and getting your brain scrambled. I would love to see the research behind that, but at least on the positive side, MMA is not fully turning a blind eye to it, as Dana White donates millions year after year to the research of CTE. But it's not enough, really. The research is too slow, and it will always be. The history of fighters getting knocked out and broken like that table is mountain. It's so easy to understand though. The fight game is intoxicating, suffocating, and its call is a siren song for any fan who brushes these facts to the side, as we see these men and women put their lives on the line in an octagon. And as the crowd roars and snuffs out any concern for the fighters and has them go out there, exposing themselves to danger. Now, these stories illustrate the dark side and the cost. But what is the upside? Why do these fighters still do what they do? And they put their life on the line and happily do so. I'm not a fighter myself, so I wouldn't be able to tell you, but let's see how the people affected talk about it.
So Sam Patterson, fighting for Brave Combat Federation. My record is 9-1-1. I know the damage of what this sport can do and what consequences are, but I know what I'm getting myself into. I chose to fight.
I do, and I just know what I signed up for. I just don't want to, obviously I don't want to be like someone with a glass jaw when I'm like 40 and I'm going to be fighting like for peanuts and I'm still trying to survive, but I'm getting knocked out every fight. I want to achieve great things, and I felt the only thing I know how to achieve great things is fighting. It makes me feel alive. It feels like it's therapy for me, and it's like peace in a way.
So it's 2022. The time when people can pretend they don't understand what the risks are, taking a bunch of head trauma. That's over. Everyone knows. I don't care what the repercussions are as long as they know what the repercussions are. I would never support taking away their ability to chase an impossible dream. Never. And I completely understand why people feel like that would be a reasonable position to take. Look at Spencer Fisher. Junior Seau shit himself. I mean, maybe this has something to do with head trauma. Who knows, man? Who knows? Guys that parked on the train tracks. The likelihood that that's uninvolved with CTE seems nearly impossible. All of these things, yes, I understand. You know, Jimmy, I've seen the videos of these guys, and yes, it's awful, but that's the risk. That is the risk. And they're choosing to accept that risk in pursuit of something unattainable that only the greatest among us attain.
Look, at the end of the day, I'm a firm believer of living a life worth living. And if for you find your glory in MMA and you find that's your calling and you see that your life is going to be cut short because of it and you're completely fine with that, more power to you. Go out there and do what you want and entertain these millions of people, because that made your life be worth it. If you rather live a long life and not half that, and half your life be worth living in a different way, pursue your career in that. But it's not easy to get to the top of a sport like MMA. So new sports are popping up. Check out this video to see how bare knuckle boxing is making a ton of money with fighters that some of them couldn't make it in MMA. And check out this video right here to see how Demetrius Johnson, the best MMA fighter in the world, is keeping himself away from CTE by just being so good at what he does. And I'll see you in that video. See ya!
Ballin' now, skirt down, all of these diamond soap. Bought them for me, but they're yours now. You could drink it, but take it slow. Ballin' for you, falling